So, hello and welcome to Something Who, episode 43. I'm talking again with Chris Chapman, a man of many talents, but among them is putting together these fantastic documentaries for the Doctor Who Blu-ray collections. The last time we talked, Chris, it was pretty much at the start of the pandemic, sometime in March last year. And I guess at that point the impact was being felt in the UK. So I suppose as some degree of normality starts to resume, how have you fared? How's it been for you?
It's been busy, Richard. It's. I think I've certainly personally been quite lucky. I've seen a lot of people in my industry have a very difficult time, and I hope that changes. It's certainly starting to change very quickly. But I've personally had a very busy lockdown and kind of went from cancelling Doctor Who shoots that I was all ready to shoot to being employed on Countryfile for a year, doing Doctor Who in the background, running out to Aldbourne when I could, grabbing Frank Skinner when I could, and going and filming in a restaurant in December at about the only week that I could possibly get Sylvester McCoy to sit at a table with Bonnie Langford and Sophie Aldrin. So it's been kind of non-stop in quite a pleasing way, and I wouldn't have liked to have seen what my lockdown would have been like without that. I think if I'd been unable to work, it would have probably been quite a dark time, as I'm sure it has been for lots of people. So no, it's been okay, and we're gradually shifting back to normal in terms of filming. I think it's just made us all very conscious, particularly on the Who range, of how precious the people we film with are. Nobody wants to be the person that goes and kills Fraser Hines or wipes out Sylvester McCoy or something like that. So it makes us we're always trying to avoid that, even in peace times. But it's made us acutely aware of how fragile and precious the people that we work with are. Definitely. Yeah.
No, I definitely got the impression that you were busy from your Twitter feed, and similar story for me really. In that, I've got a very different line of work at a broadcast transmission company and sort of IT really, but nonetheless very, very busy. But yeah, it seems to have been like that. People seem to have either been flat out or had nothing to do, and I think it's been a very unequal kind of experience as a result. But yeah, I'm glad to hear that you managed to keep going. And of course, now award-winning. You may well have won other awards, but the Doctor Who Cookbook Revisited, winning the award last summer, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, that was a delicious surprise, really, because I've entered Doctor Who docs for Royal Television Society Awards before when I lived up in the Northeast, and we never got anywhere, really, because I think ultimately the joy of these things is they're made for such a niche audience. We kind of revel in that, but you show that to a not we, and they kind of go, what is this? What is this supposed to be? Why haven't you made this for a general audience? And so normally we got nowhere. And then I'd moved to Bristol and put in the Doctor Who cookbook for the RTS West, which is a big kind of region of the RTS, up against a lot of big broadcast things. And cookbook won, weirdly, against Countryfile that I was working with at the time. I'd come back from a Countryfile shoot into the car park of our post-production house, and the manager of that post-production house was on the RTS board and came out and gave me that award in the car park as I was giving them the rushes from that day's filming on the farm, and then had to keep secret about it for about 3 months because they were dropping it as a live stream, as a recorded, streamed award thing virtually. Yeah. But no, it was lovely, and we've just had duplicate awards through for Colin and Nicola and Janet and Toby and Sarah and Fraser, and I've sent out duplicate cookbook aprons that say RTS award win. So we've milked it, Richard, for all it's worth, as a chance to say thank you, as well as a chance to say this probably, even though I've entered stuff next year, it may not happen again, because I'm conscious that cookbook is kind of, if you were not a Doctor Who fan, you would watch it and it would have this special novelty of, what the fuck is this? What is this? In a way that if I enter like the Fury from the Deep documentary, I'm really proud of that film, and I think it's got great production values and really stands up. But you're still thinking like, why should I? If you're not you're thinking, why should I care about the story? They haven't even got clips from it. It's just like audio and pictures and what's going on. I think Cookbook just hit a sweet spot of being generally entertaining, and we were quite lucky with the timing of that. So no, that was a real high point actually of last year. It really was.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm absolutely of the view that you should milk stuff when you get the chance. You definitely want to celebrate success. Yeah, so and I'm really pleased because I thought that was a standout. I mean, not that I don't love all of your films, Chris, but I did think that had a particular heart to it. So I think, I mean, as a basis for our discussion today, I've heard you talk extensively about how you've filmed the documentaries, and you know, of course, that's always interesting. But I thought it might be interesting to talk about the storytelling. Simplistically, because I don't do what you do, I imagine that there's a couple of elements to that which are sort of thinking about it beforehand, thinking about, you know, what story you want to tell. I suppose, well, and then I guess on the day there's making sure you've got the stuff that you wanted in order to be able to tell the story. But then probably the most difficult part of it afterwards, sifting through all that material, throwing away loads of really good stuff, but getting, I guess, to the heart of the story that you wanted to tell afterwards. So maybe a quick discussion about that, and then we might get into the specifics of some of the films that you made.
Sure, yeah. No, I'm very happy to. I was saying to you before we started that it's so easy to go to the anecdotes of filming days, because just like classic Doctor Who, those are the bits I focus in on, and I want to know about filming at Dover Castle, because there's something about being on location that crystallises memories, and that you're more likely to have come up against barriers or tricky things or had unexpected things happen. But actually, you know, the real authoring, if you like, of the film is kind of before and after that point. You know, there's is the scripting and then the editing, and I'm preparing a few films at the moment where you're at that stage early on of thinking, right, what do I have? And that it's such a crucial bit where, particularly with the Doctor Who's, you're so disciplined, you're so limited, not in a bad way, but limited by how was this story filmed in the first place? You know, was it on location? Was it in the studio? Who was in it? Are they alive? Are they happy to be involved? Do they live in this country? Oh no, we can't travel because of a pandemic. You know, and you ultimately start with a shopping list. You start with a sense of, right, if I'm going to do this film, I've got access to this, and this. I want to avoid at all costs just taking these people into a blank studio and just making them a talking head. I want to try and give it some reality of some description. I want to kind of zhuzh it up a bit into something that feels like a special story, but I don't want to go too far. If I invent too much, if I create too much at that level, it starts to feel fake for the people involved. It starts to lose its reality and the whole thing collapses. So something like Cookbook is probably right on the edge of of reality, because it is a very entertainment-y format, but at least you're grounded in the fact this is actually your kitchen and this is actually a recipe you submitted, and there must be a story behind why you submitted it in the first place. But you can go too far with that thing and see films collapse. I'm trying to think if we've had that happen. I think there was certainly a couple where I've overextended myself, but mostly it's better to hone in on the people and what they might want to say. And then, as you say, that moment in post-production when you're bringing through the edit, when you're sifting through the stuff, it's probably my favourite bit, actually. I'm not a great believer in transcripts. You know, a lot of people, when they film, they pay people or sometimes use programs online to transcribe the interviews. So you can look at it on paper, you can look at the words, and I try and avoid doing that, because I think the words are only half the story. That it's about how a person could say, so that was no good, or something, and they could say, so that was no good in a million different ways. And so you want to actually watch the thing, and so I will, something like Our Sarah Jane for season 14, we interviewed about 12, 13 people, all for about 40 minutes each, and I will just put all of that on an Avid timeline. So I've got like a 13-hour cut, and then I will literally go through it and chop it up. And if there's something that's obviously no good, out. If I'm left with the 20 minutes worth of chunks from somebody's interview, I'll then structure those chronologically, because you may not have spoken chronologically necessarily, and I'll start to then add them to the whole of everybody else's chunks. You know, so you start arranging these little blocks of speech on a timeline, clustered into chapters, and then trying to make them work so that they're witty and they kind of counterpoint each other, and they have a dialogue with each other. and that's probably my favourite bit. Where you think, and maybe it's a frustrating bit because you suddenly go, oh shit, the sound on that is rubbish, or why didn't I ask him that? But it's the bit when you've got all the words suddenly, and now you're arranging words into a story on screen. So that's my favourite bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've got a very small insight into that because I guess when I edit these podcasts, and it's so much easier to do it in audio, I can take out a little chunk here and a little chunk there. I mean, of course, never to tell a different story from what was actually spoken, but just, I guess, maybe to speed something up or to make it better in the telling. And sometimes you can move something to a different place in the conversation because it makes more sense to have all that material together rather than to try and bring the listener back further down the line. So, but yeah, when you've got something like you're describing there, it's incredible. I mean, I guess talking about the Sarah Jane documentary, I watched that yesterday again. I mean, I watched it when it first came out, but I wanted to have another go at it, and I find it very interesting because, I mean, there were things about that film that hit me quite hard the first time round. I guess you've got all the stuff at the end about how her dying affected the young audience so much, and that was and David Tennant quite emotional at times in there. But this time round, it's a very personal thing. I mean, I have recently had to say goodbye to a close work colleague, and then Tom was doing the same thing, talking about his relationship with Liz, and to some extent, I mean, clearly he was emotional about the fact that she was no longer around. But that moment when they were no longer working, there's a lovely line you put in at the start where he just says, "You give up fun very reluctantly." That spoke to me really clearly. Yeah, about, even though it is just work. I mean, it is just a job, but nonetheless, you do connect with people in the course of work, and it does mean something. And that when the work comes to an end, it's never quite going to be the same again. And I thought you just captured that, both the happiness and the regret in the same moment so beautifully.
Thank you. Well, no, thank you. I'm glad that came over. Yeah, it's. I think we were very lucky with Tom, and I can't really, the lovely thing about these films is they kind of exist as a piece of living matter, and. I don't script Tom. We went and filmed with Tom in his favourite pub in the back room that he prefers to film with, and all we could really do was create a nice, relaxed atmosphere for Tom. Really, I had a set of questions, and I had a chap called Lewis with me and a makeup artist, and basically we were just very nice to Tom. We just had a lovely time with Tom, and we didn't. I think it's important not to jazz things up as being too melodramatic or important when you sit down with a person in that situation. You want it just to be like, okay, Tom, what do you have to say? And I'll ask Tom questions, but really a lot of that power just comes from what Tom brought to the table on the day. I think we got him just at a really good moment, and I've interviewed Tom before, and he's been great before, but there's something about Liz that kind of really unlocks his heart, really, that he genuinely loved her and continues to love her. And you'll talk to other companion actors who will say, oh yeah, he really had he really loved Liz, didn't he? He really had a real soft spot for her, and I think to quite a profound level. And as Tom gets older, and I'm sure, as he always has, deals with his own mortality kind of face on, I think he is an emotional, heartfelt kind of guy when you strip that away. And maybe he got tougher skin as he went through the role of Doctor Who, as he went through those 7 years. But early on, Liz was the kind of first happy face he saw. Liz was, and the Doctor talks about that, doesn't he? Is that with, is that Matt Smith? Is that like an Amy thing that he talks about? Yours was the first happy face, the first smile that I saw. That it's almost like Liz imprinted on him, and he never forgot that. So I think we were very lucky, and I tried not to talk too much. I tried to to steer Tom and to provoke him and really just give him chapter headings and say, okay, now let's talk about turning the lights on in Blackpool, and now let's talk about Liz's her kind of farewell party and things like that party that they had at the Hilton. I don't think he's really talked particularly about before. But he just needs that nudge to go, oh yeah, I remember that, and suddenly you've accessed as for all of us, you need a nudge to access those memories, and I like those films because it's not like a making of where you're obligated to tell this happened and this happened and this happened, and inevitably that means you have to go down some well-trod roads. I think with a character study, you can kind of come at it in the way that feels right, because you're never going to say everything. You can never say. Yeah. You could say everything that could ever be needed to be said about Fury from the Deep, but you can't say everything ever that needed to be said about Liz Sladen, because any life is too big. So you can be more subjective. You can be more twisty-turny, and I think with that film, certainly it was a big case of kind of working out who we could speak to, and almost making a list at the beginning of I wouldn't script a film like that, but I would write down the chapter headings and say, obviously, if we're going to tell the story, we need to, how do we tell the story of Liz as a child? How do we tell teenage Liz in Liverpool? Can we use Coronation Street clips to tell? No, we can't afford that. Okay, we can afford a photo. Okay, we skip Coronation Street. Okay, now she's joining Doctor Who. Oh, wow. Okay, we got loads of people to talk about that. Okay, so who can give me? Let's talk to George Galaccio, because maybe he can give us a more ground level view of a friend rather than automatically going for the showbiz co-stars. And then how do we talk about Liz after Doctor Who, and how do we talk about, she's come back in 2006? Loads of people can talk about that. And it's kind of feast or famine. There are kind of areas where you think, I could blow my budget and my filming days on loads of people to talk about Doctor Who, but I don't need loads of people to talk about Doctor Who. I need 3 people maybe to talk about 70s Doctor Who. And so I want Tom, I want Philip Hinchcliffe, I was really interested, actually. I hadn't initially thought of having Louise Jameson involved, because I thought, well, you came after, so did you work with... But obviously, particularly someone like Louise, who's very emotionally savvy and intelligent, has been around the convention circuit, so can suddenly give you a perspective on Liz in those years. And also that baton passing of Liz leaving and Louise coming in, and that sense of an absence that Tom seems to have articulated by being quite mean and beastly to Louise in those, when they initially worked together, because of the absence of Liz. I think because he in any way disliked Louise. I genuinely don't think he did. He may have disliked the ethos of the character, but more than anything, he missed Liz. He'd just been almost dumped, by his platonic life partner, and then you suddenly realise where your gaps are. You suddenly think, okay, if we're going to do Liz's childhood, I can't have a single person talking about this for 15 minutes. It is almost impossible to start your film with a single voice that takes you through an extended section without it feeling just a bit dry, or just not full of life enough. And so it became a big thing of the involvement of Liz's family and Sadie and Brian. I met with, and Brian, I think, is just by his nature quite a reserved, quite a shy guy, and was very supportive, but kind of said, I don't think I can do this. And I think that was just a very personal decision for him. And fortunately, amazingly, Sadie very much was, no, I can do this, and I want to help, and gave us this wonderful interview that kind of did everything you would hope for her to do, and meant that, because kind of if those two people say no, you kind of need to cancel the film. I think certainly if those two people say we don't want this to happen, you kind of have to cancel the film. I do think, unless you're dealing with some kind of already contentious or political public figure, if you were making a film about Boris Johnson, you wouldn't care what Boris Johnson thought about it, or his family if he died particularly. But if you were making a heartfelt love letter, and the family don't want you to make it, then you're done. Really, that's the end. So it was saying, okay, we've got Sadie for this bit. And through the family, we were able to contact kind of old friends of Liz's from that time and get them involved, and you piece it together until you've got a filming day. Until you've got, in this case, I think we did it over like about 6 or so days, where it would be me and an assistant would travel to usually the homes of those people, or somewhere nearby, and we'd film with them with an iDirect, so where we put like a sideways periscope in front of the camera, so that they're physically looking at the camera, straight down the lens, meeting the eye of the viewer, but actually what they're seeing in the camera is my eyes, is my face reflected from a sideways mirror. So and because if you set up somebody in front of a camera and they're just looking at the lens, you can't make an emotional connection unless you're an amazing presenter who gets paid lots of money to do that. So you need a human connection to be able to speak honestly. The problem is when I watch it now, after the pandemic, all I can bloody think of is Zoom calls. That whole style of iDirect, which has come through for me, has come through like Channel 4 documentaries and so on, now feels a bit odd because we're just so used to seeing somebody looking straight down the camera lens. And somebody said on a forum recently, "Oh, was this filmed during the pandemic? Have they filmed this film?" No, we were doing it artistically. And so the world has changed in that way. I'm rambling now, Richard, but no, it was a really lovely project to piece together, and most like the John Nathan Turner one, where we had a lot of words that I was then, shaping into a narrative. And with all these films, I kind of feel the most important thing for me is to tell the story as if you don't know the ending. So to tell the story in the now without any pre-knowledge. And when I think of like the documentaries that I've loved in recent years, even going back to things like Senna, and more recently there was an amazing film about the Challenger disaster on Netflix that did a really good job of it gave you a bit at the beginning, just like we do, to say, here's the thing that you know about, hey, and then it goes back to zero and it tells you the story step by step, not messing about with it, not jumping around, but just saying this happened and then this happened and then this happened and this happened. And we lose that chronology sometimes when you look back on a thing, when you think about like the pandemic, or you think about somebody's career or your own life, you lose a sense of, oh yeah, that was happening at the same time as that. Oh, and that happened the day before that. And then, so that contributed, that was part of, you lose all that. And we're so keen sometimes to be miniature Quentin Tarantinos and jump around and start with the ending and then go back and all this. Yeah, I think sometimes there's a real power to saying this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And with Liz, you've got this perfect story of somebody who gets big, becomes a genuinely loved star, and then loses it, and through no fault of her own, but gets typecast, gets stuck, and gets in the doldrums, I think, and then comes back. Most of those stories end quite sadly, but with Liz, you had a story where you've got this beautiful arc where she does get a happy ending, and obviously, ultimately, we lose her far too soon. But I think there's something. I don't think it's like the John Nathan Turner story where the first half is up and the second half is down, quite powerfully, strikingly so. I think with Liz, I think it does end. I think the second half of the film is an up. Her death is almost like this bittersweet frustration because you're so sad to lose a friend, you're so upset to lose a friend, but you're so glad that she had what she had in those last, I guess those last kind of 5-10 years or so. She had such for somebody who was, I think, quite insecure and not really aware of her worth or how good she was. I think to get this absolutely winning endorsement to say, no, you're wrong, the universe loves you, I think is so powerful. Obviously, we'd rather still have her, but I think it's an amazing story to get to tell.
Yeah. I mean, I was saying to someone the other day that it's such a shame sometimes that you don't say the thing that you want to say until somebody dies. If it's a eulogy. But I guess with Liz, people were able to say those things while she was still alive as a result of her turning back up in School Reunion and then getting her own series. So she did get to see all of that love, played out beforehand. So that was excellent. I think the other thing that I particularly liked about your film was the Alan Ayckbourn angle and sort of getting to see how that whole kind of stage acting side of her, because I think a lot of the potted sort of biographical bits I'd seen about her kind of just focused on the TV stuff and kind of left out all of that, and yet you can sort of see that was such a big foundation of what she did later.
Yeah, and I'm a complete tart for that kind of thing, really, because I kind of you read her book, her memoir, and you think, oh, I didn't know she worked with Alan Ayckbourn. I wonder if Alan Ayckbourn would do our film. That would be amazing. So you think, first of all, this is somebody you would not expect to see on a Doctor Who doc.
No.
I know Alan Ayckbourn will not be famous to everybody, but to a lot of people, he's a massive figure and an incredibly influential chap. And the idea that for both of them it was the beginning. It was the beginning of their careers, and I thought, well, that's going to be memorable times. That's not just going to be a job for Alan. That's going to be formative. And fortunately, Alan has a very good archive and an archivist who works with him, and so they had loads of photos. That's often the tricky thing with theatre. That's often why theatre can be difficult to explore in this kind of film, because you can't go to a clip.
Yeah.
You can't even go to an audio recording like you would on a radio play or something. You only have photos, and maybe you don't have photos. And if you don't have photos, you're if you have no archive, if you have nothing to cut away to, unless you have loads of interviewees, you're kind of screwed. And so we were just very lucky to be able to do that, and then chart her theatre through Liverpool and Manchester. And fortunately, they had lots of photos as well. And I think I loved seeing her on those photos of her on stage.
Yeah.
At the Library Theatre, I think, where she just is I guess, in her early 20s, and you kind of feel like you're seeing just another angle on the Liz that you remember as a child. So no, and there's a freshness to that I kind of hope every time we take the Doctor Who fan to somewhere that's related to what they love, but something they haven't seen before, that's always a win. That's always a success. So I wanted to make sure it wasn't kind of autistically, not in a bad way, but kind of obsessively Doctor Who. It had to be prepared to go to other places.
Yeah, no, I think that's a real strength of the film, because it's good to see the Doctor Who, but it's good to see it in context and understand what part it played in the whole story, I think, and you do that excellently. Okay, I mean, maybe we might move on to the Who's Doctor Who Revisited film. So that's also, I suppose, it tells the story of a number of different people. So rather than one person, you're getting the story of perhaps half a dozen, 10 people told through a film, sort of then and now. And again, for those people you feature, often quite briefly, it's startling to see how well they remember it and how big an impact it made on their lives.
Yeah. I mean, we really enjoyed making Who's Doctor Who Revisited. It was done very quickly, is the funny thing about it. I was looking back at my notes, and actually I think it was quite a late commission. I think we suddenly realised there was a gap on the set, and I can't remember if we'd been trying to make a different type of film or what, but I think a combination of me and Toby Haydock and Richard Bignell were kind of saying, oh, Who's Doctor Who's going to be on this set, isn't it? It's going to be on 14. Has anybody ever done something about that? And I that significance of it being the first documentary, I kind of like this on a self-indulgent level. I like the idea of making a documentary about a documentary and kind of shining a light on the 70s process, which is so different as well. But then you look at the film and you're like, oh, this is great, because there are so many kids in this. There are so many 70s kids, people like Casper and Rosemary and the kids of Smallwood School, who are just jumping out of the screen in almost like a 7-Up kind of way. And you think, well, surely if Doctor Who turned up at your school, if a crew turns up at your school when you're 7 and asks you for your thoughts and then puts you on the telly, you're going to remember that. That's a significant moment for everybody involved. And I'd never seen those people tracked down. And that was the trickiest bit, or that was the tracking down, because, okay, so Casper Hewitt, really easy. Casper Hewitt, you put that into Google in speech marks, comes up straight away, because he's a professor at a university, or he's a doctor, at a university, and he also I think he does like his own podcast, and so he's there immediately. You go, oh, there's Casper. He lives in Newcastle, and there's his email. Oh, I should say, but he's easy to contact and hasn't changed his name, as his men tend to be easier to track down because their names typically will remain the same. Casper's very happy to be involved. There we go. The only tricky thing is filming in Newcastle, because we wanted to be on location rather than get them all in a studio. We wanted to go to them and into their worlds. The tricky ones on that were finding Rosemary and finding the Smallwood School kids. And with Rosemary, it was really hard, because obviously we didn't know that she'd died. We that wasn't general knowledge, general information. We knew that her name was Rosemary Matthews. Matthews is a very common surname. That's not going to help us particularly. She presumably, maybe, would have been married, so would have had a new name. How on earth do we find her? And we searched and searched, and all the normal things I would do, going through. Richard will look through the electoral roll. I will just Google the hell out of it, because I genuinely believe everybody's on the internet somewhere. Facebook, social media, everything we could. The BBC obviously kept no contacts for that kind of participation that was very fleeting.
Yeah.
And ultimately, Richard Bignell, who's always been such a stalwart for us, came back to me and said, I don't think we can find her. I think the trail is dead. And I had one more look, thinking that we're not going to find a female name. What did I do? I Googled for her father's name, which again was quite I can't remember her father's first name, but for kind of so-and-so Matthews, in quote marks, and which came up with nothing because it was such a broad name. But when I put that with Rosemary as a second search term, it took me to a Just Giving page. And I thought, what's this? Why has it brought me here? And it was a lady called Sarah. I can't remember Sarah's surname, but it was a lady called Sarah who was raising money. And further down the page was a comment from somebody who shared the name of Rosemary's dad, saying, I've made my donation, kiss, kiss, kiss. And I saw that, this is a Sarah who says she's running a marathon in memory of her sister Rosemary. And I thought, this is somebody with a name, same name as the dad, general name, but same name, with a daughter called Sarah and another daughter called Rosemary, who seems to have died at some point. But that felt like too big a coincidence not to be connected. So the Just Giving page allowed me to send a message to the person running it, to Sarah, who came back and said, I'm Sarah. I was born Sarah Matthews. Rosemary Matthews was my sister. She died in her early 20s. And then partly you're ecstatic to have solved the mystery, and then you're gutted, obviously, to hear of a tragedy. Yeah. And then you're also thinking, how on earth do I make it feel gentle and right for these people to be involved in a documentary? And I went and met with Sarah and her mum Liz, who of course does the Ice Warrior impression in the original film, and they could have easily said no, because for them it's Rosemary it was one of those awful sad stories where she'd been diagnosed with a terminal illness from very young in her life. So I think when they made Who's Doctor Who, they would have known about it. And she lived to early 20s, always under the shadow of, you're not going to be around forever. And I think that remains a very raw thing for the family. Yeah. But they wanted to be involved, and they wanted to pay tribute, and I hope we gave them a nice way of doing that. They were certainly very, very, very generous and sweet about the film, about our film when I showed it to them before it was released. I wanted to make sure they were happy, and so that was really that was a real hunt with a very sad ending. It was more positive, obviously, with Smallwood kids, who I purely stalked through Facebook. Actually, with all of the Smallwood kids, the trick was that Karen Scott Nadal, who is so kind of chirpy and full of life in the original film, she had kept her name, and is a very unusual name, was on Facebook. And through her, we managed to track down the two other lads who did it. And actually, I think one of them, I think I did just stalk them on Facebook and just message them until they replied. But I'm so glad that they did, and that we got those three. And those were the only three we could. There were a few people we found who, for whatever reason, were like, no, I don't want to do it. But actually, I was so glad that we got those three. And originally, I thought, let's get 10 of them or so. But actually, just having the three means you could really zoom in on them. And Toby kind of said to me the other day, he said, if you were going to get three, these are the three that I'd want. I'd want the lad who is like, I don't watch Doctor Who, I watch it with nothing else on, and you'd want Karen and the other chappie with his squeaky voice and everything. I think is lovely. So there was so much detective work involved in that film, and then it actually in the edit kind of comes together quite smoothly, because we haven't filmed 13 hours of stuff. We've gone out on location with limited time, filmed it over 4 days. And I've scripted it in the sense that I need to know the order of the film in order to write kind of rough presentory bits for Toby to kind of get us from A to B. and not have to do everything in voiceover. Now, Toby, I'll write something, and then Toby will take it and make it his own, and then say it. But then all the chats are completely off the cuff. We would set up 3 cameras, so we've got a pair of close-ups and a wide. So we don't need to do like loads of retakes. We can just let things. If something spontaneous happens, you've got it. You don't need to say, "Oh, Toby, can you look surprised again?" Or "Can you look sad? Can you look sad again?" or anything awful like that. Yeah. You've got it. So actually, a film like that came together very. I remember it being quite smooth in the edit, and just more of a case of how long do we want this to be, and is this in the right order structurally? And I think pretty much we stayed to where we wanted to be. You kind of feel in a film like that. Casper was our leveler, our kind of you kind of in every film like that you need an interview or a sequence that feels like which is the bit that kind of sums up what you are. And it's not saying it's vanilla, but it's saying this is the most normal thing in your film that you will then deviate from in different directions. And Casper was this lovely, joyous, exactly what you would want to see in this kind of film when you hear you're going to be interviewing kids. So it's not a tragedy, it's not a weird unexpected twist, it's just here's my amazing memory of being a kid and being in this film. So you want to get to that as soon as you can, and then because you can't start with Rosemary, you can't start with something awful. You have to emotionally. Structure is not just about organizing your content in a logical way, it's about the emotions and leading you through that emotional up and down, that emotional terrain, so that you're not. If you throw 2 incredibly sad things at a viewer, one after the other, then they're not both going to register. You have to give it peaks and troughs. And so ultimately, I think it was a joyous film. I think it was one where we were taking a leaf out of Michael Apted's book, and that the power of confronting somebody with a clip of themselves as a 10-year-old, I think is still an incredible gift that cinema, that film can give.
Yeah.
And I hope it's a very joyous film. I hope.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the powers of that is that, I mean, so most of the children, I guess, in that film are a similar generation to me. So it's 77. So I suppose I was 9 then, so probably sort of similar age to them, maybe a little older. And I guess but so when you're filming them again, they kind of know who they are. They've by the time you're in your 50s, you've kind of got a sense of what your life is going to be, and I guess confronting then at that stage with someone who's much more full of possibilities, and seeing that on the screen, that is, I guess, quite poignant. And as you say, not necessarily sad, because you have sort of great things that happen in your life as well as sad things. But yeah, you can sort of see it back with some perspective, which perhaps you don't get if you're sort of viewing it again after 5, 10 or 15 years. So I think that's very interesting. I was just going to say, I think there's an aspect as well of it as a time capsule that you have to think these are people, so certainly the Smallwood kids it was just like a working class area of London. They had no access to cameras. There was no sense of home movie, or now I'll be filming my daughter, kind of my 2-year-old, every day in some form. Yes.
So she'll be swimming through archive when she's my age. But for those Smallwood kids, it's genuinely a piece of magic that a record exists of them at that age, and I think they all realised how special that was, how lucky that was that happened.
Mm. Yeah. And I think also for Tony Cash and his team, I mean, I don't suppose there have been too many people coming back to them and saying, tell us all about that lively arts film you made about Rachmaninoff or whatever. So I guess it's quite interesting for them to come together and remember what their life was like too.
Yeah. I mean, we loved Tony, and he was very supportive of the film. I think he'd been asked about it once or twice, and it was that sense of, why do people keep asking me about this? As you say, this Doctor Who film. When I made documentaries about high art, and often that kind of series like The Lively Arts was quite highbrow, and Doctor Who. But I think Tony believed in pop culture in a kind of Sidney Newman kind of way, in a sort of that he kind of thought, well, if this is a big deal, if this show is this popular, that's interesting, and there must be a reason why it is this popular, particularly with this age group. What does that tell us about people, rather than just, wouldn't it be nice to know how they make Doctor Who? And Tony and his team we were actually supposed to have Melvyn Bragg was going to join us at one point for that reunion. I was kind of a little wary about the Melvyn side in a way, because I knew that viewers would kind of think, oh yeah, so it's going to be all about Melvyn Bragg, and you think, well, actually, Melvyn did very little on Who's Doctor Who. He was there for that half day of links in front of the TARDIS, and he narrates it, so he feels involved. But it wasn't Melvyn's story to tell. It was Tony who was the storyteller. Melvyn was really the face of that. But at one point, we were going to have Melvyn join them in that cafe by Television Centre, and just a scheduling thing in the end meant that he couldn't join us. But I think I'm happy that people seem to watch the film and not go, "Where's Melvyn Bragg?" That they just watch it and go, "This is interesting." And we were obviously very, very, very sad that it was only about 3 or 4 months after we filmed that we lost Tony Cash. And Tony had been obviously in his 80s, an older chap, but had been so full of life and stories with us. And genuinely, I think when he meets the Smallwood kids and they kind of pay tribute to him, and he talks about it being balm to his ears, to hear this. I think he really meant that. I think that he found it quite a moving experience. And unfortunately, I suspect he didn't see our film before he passed. I mean, obviously that doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but I sent him the link.
Right.
And never heard back, and I didn't particularly push on that, because I thought, sometimes people take a while, or maybe he didn't like it or something. But I always, with that kind of contributor, I will send them the film before we lock it, just out of me wanting to show them a nice thing, really. And I didn't hear back from Tony, and then things got quite busy, and I didn't think any more of it, and then heard that he'd died, and obviously we made sure that his widow received a copy of the box set. Which again is nothing in the grand scheme of things, but I'm just really glad that we got to talk to him about it and have him in the film, because it was his baby in the first place, and I think without him the whole thing collapses a bit. So I think it was a tribute to really a different time of making films and the way that he made it. And it did remind me, I've just been watching the 7-Up series on BritBox for the first time, and I'd had this kind of understanding of what 7-Up was through osmosis, as we all do. You grow up hearing about this. But I think Tony was taking inspiration from things like that and making a proper documentary, a proper, there's something about those 70s documentaries made on film that and you see it in the Up series, that when they flash back to the 60s or 70s, it feels more exciting than when you flash back to kind of video and to crappy video in the early 90s or something. There's something really special about the way that documentary looked in the 70s particularly. We used to love that on, like, when we do documentaries about Havoc, that they had that amazing Dying for a Living documentary that with them naked in the sauna, and you think, this is perfect, this is what memories look like. They look like slightly low quality 70s film material. So no, we loved making that one, and actually we put that film in for the same RTS thing that the cookbook won. Right. Who knows? I have no idea whether it will register, in any way with the judges. But but we're very proud of the film, definitely.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I guess if it had been made in the 90s, if Doctor Who had still been a thing then, I guess it would have been a lot of celebrities making ironic comments about it. But whereas instead, what you actually got was a lovely thing of the kids that it's actually aimed at talking about how they feel about it. So it's a much more immediate, and you get more of an emotional connection, I think.
It reminded me a bit of the thing, that wonderful 90s article in Doctor Who magazine, the class of 5B or whatever it was, that they got school kids to watch Terror of the Zygons and then the TV movie, and it never fails. It's such a powerful thing to get kids involved, and I'd much rather hear what they had to say, as you say, than supposed celebrity fans. Or as we did on the after party, getting One Direction to pipe in and say what they really thought. I don't care what One Direction. I would love to have known what kind of a 10-year-old, what a 7-year-old in their front room thought more than One Direction. Never mind.
Sure. Well, yeah. Okay. So perhaps to talk about Terence and me, it's hard to imagine, I think, a person in in the whole kind of Doctor Who sphere who was more greatly loved, I guess, than Terence. I mean, I know when we heard that he'd died, we on the same day we made a special version of this podcast just because we kind of felt like we couldn't let the thing pass without saying something, and it was just a few words. But it was the same kind of thing, I suppose, that you would the Target books, the stories that you wrote, but just his kind of both the humility and that nobody really had a bad word to say about him. But again, what you've done with your film here, well, a couple of things. It's the whole story, and I think again, I hadn't seen the whole story of Terence in one place before, and you've given us another kind of bittersweet moment with Frank Skinner at the start, where he met Terence. He did have the chance to tell him how much he appreciated him, but he also missed the opportunity to sit down in his front room and have a chat. It was a nice little start to the film to think about when we do have opportunities, we should take them.
Yeah, and that's something I believe very strongly, that if you love someone, then tell them that you love them. Don't leave that too late, because we will all die at some point. Yes. The sooner we accept our own mortality and think, well, I should probably do that before I die, it's a good thing. And I'm obsessed. I'm a kind of heartfelt, morbid person, and so I'm obsessed with death. And but I think there's a joy that comes from death. That sounds awful, but I think there's a joy that comes from realizing that time is fleeting and that you should make the most of it, and also a joy from looking back on memories of people that you've lost. There is a joy there despite the sadness, and we were just very lucky on that film because I'd worked with Terence a lot before. I'd interviewed him a lot, like half a dozen different times for the DVDs, and I always loved spending time with Terence. Those cliches about him just being very lugubrious, easygoing, likable. There were never kind of airs and graces about Terence. It was always I'd always look forward to those interviews because I'd think, oh, this would be lovely, and he would look at me as a young Doctor Who fan with this slightly kind of knowing bemusement at kind of, oh, you're still interested in me then, are you? But he would always have a little. He'd never be arrogant or egotistical about it. It would be a wryness to how Terence would imagine his fame, and I just thought I didn't want to do a talking head version of this, like we had with JNT and with Liz, because I thought it's not that kind of life. It's not, Terence's life is not about ups and downs, is not about the arc of his life. It's not a story like that to tell in the same way that Liz and JNT had definite, this is an epic of a life. Terence didn't have that kind of life, and that's no ill to Terence, but he didn't. He rose slowly in his chosen field, succeeded in his chosen field, continued, retired, had a nice time at conventions, and then died. And I don't think there's a real core tragedy or moment of change to Terence. So you kind of think, well, it's not about a story of a life so much as about what did he mean to people. What did what did this person mean? What is the impact of their legacy, of their footprint? And so I thought, can't do talking heads to tell that kind of story, or it just becomes just noise, just like everybody saying he was great for an hour, and then it ends. You're like, it's too much. So if we do it in the kind of same kind of way that we did Who's Doctor Who, where it's a presenter and it's very sequential, it's very chapter based. So we are going to this place to talk to this person about this aspect of Terence's life. It will not be intercut with other people talking about other bits of his life. It will be let's turn the microscope on Terence at the start of his Doctor Who writing career, or Terence as a student at university. Let's zoom in on that and tell his story in that way, and that takes the pressure off you having to tell every minute of the journey. It means you can cherry pick topics and areas that you're interested in. It also means, well, I kind of looked at that and thought, I do want to hear from his family, from his university friends, Crispin Letts, Barry's son. I want him to tell me about their friendship. But are we missing a trick here? Because that relationship with fandom, that relationship with his readers and his viewers, felt like it was core to Terence in a way that even beyond, Liz and the many, many fans that Liz had, it felt like I would have felt a bit weird if I just got a random Doctor Who fan even a famous fan, to be in the Liz documentary and tell me how wonderful Liz was, unless they were like David Tennant and they were a fan who'd become a colleague, and you could give both perspectives. But I thought with Terence and me, the idea of getting like a round table of fans and having that as the spine of the film that we could cut back to kind of give us like the intro to a particular area of Terence's life, and then the presenter could go into that area and explore and play in that area. That all felt quite natural, and I was really pleased that worked, because there were one or two dissenting voices that said, are you sure you want to cut back and forth? And I was like, no, I promise this will work in the same way. I love Asian Provocateur, the Ramesh Ranganathan series, where he will be in like Sri Lanka or somewhere, and they'll be cutting back to him with his mum on the sofa on the outskirts of London or wherever. That doesn't take you out of the moment. It just frames the moment in a different way. So I loved all that. And then just me thinking, we haven't done a tribute film with Toby before. You know, we've kind of used Toby for the Revisited series and the Looking For stuff, and I don't know if it feels right. Maybe it feels a bit easy to make it a Toby film for a tribute as well. And thought, actually, I've seen Frank Skinner at these BFI events. I've never met Frank personally, but I've seen him there. I know that he's a fan. I think this is his era. He seems to love like the Pertwee era, so I think he's a proper fan. I'll give it a go. We don't have the money to offer Frank. This is probably the lowest paid job Frank has taken in the last 30 years. But you go in and you say, look, we don't have much money, but we can do this in, I think we did it in 3 days. Yeah, we did it in 3 days. So the whole film, everything is shot in 3 days with Frank. And you're relying on, are you a big enough fan, Frank? And fortunately, Frank came back and said, not only am I a big enough fan, but I've got this great story for you. Because I didn't know this, that he said that, I live over the road from Terence's family, and I always wanted to knock on the door. I was like, oh my God, this is a gift you have. Not only have you said yes, but you've got this amazing personal story. And somebody said, I saw mostly people have been lovely about the film, which is great. I saw one or two people saying, oh, I wish it was Toby. And I love Toby, and I will continue, and Frank loves Toby, I know, and I will continue to work with Toby. But I was reading that thinking, how on earth could you turn down that not only was Frank awesome, but it makes a point about how loved Terence was if you get a genuine big TV name making that film that says something in itself about Terence's legacy, and you've got a personal story. It really meant something to Frank to sit down with Elsa and say, I really wish I'd come over 10 years ago. That's not me feeding a line. That's genuine, heartfelt stuff, and so it came together very nicely. The only problem being that the pandemic shifted it back like 8 months or so from when it was due to be made. But no, I think what I like is it's a different type of film to the Liz tribute or the JNT tribute, and it's an approach I'd take again in the future if there were figures that weren't necessarily talking head type figures, or where somebody had maybe been documented in that way already elsewhere on television. You think, I don't want to just repeat that approach. I want to do it in a different way.
Yeah, I think the other thing that Frank's character, I mean, obviously I don't know him either, but the thing that comes across very much in when you hear him and see him is that he's, it's not so much about him. He's telling the story. He's quite happy to sit in the background and tell the story of Terence and not have to be the star on the screen. And I think that helps very much with the telling of the story.
Yeah, I think he judged it just right, and I think it gave it the lightness that it needed when it needed it. But just like Toby, I think Frank's a very emotionally intelligent man who knows when to listen, and knows when to tread carefully, and also knows his stuff. I thought to myself, it sounds awful, but am I going to need to give him like a clipboard? Or, I know when we did Who Peter with Gethin Jones, Gethin, a great presenter, was really good for us, but needed a clipboard of my script, really, as most people would when they're parachuting into this kind of shoot, in order to keep on top of the facts and where it's going. And Frank didn't need that. Frank knew, if I give him the parameters and say, right, we're here to speak to Katie Manning about this point in Doctor Who history, he's like, okay, got it, off we go. So it was a joy like that, and very easy to work with. And I quite like the idea of peppering those kind of films in the future where, I don't know if for Frank that was a one-off. I don't know if there was an element of he really wanted to do a Doctor Who special feature. He really loved that idea of being on one of those. But I don't know if there's an element for him which was, it was on the bucket list and now he's done it and he got to do it to a figure he loves genuinely.
Yeah.
I don't know if he'd do another one. And so part of me is like, maybe, would Stephen Fry, would Matt Lucas, would certain figures do a Doctor Who doc if it was just a kind of a 3 days on a subject that you're passionate about? I like that idea of mixing up the range and surprising people like that. And it's testament really to hopefully the kind of goodwill that we've built up of people going, actually, these things are all right. These things are interesting.
And did you know about Terence's lair that you went into his office? I mean, a terrible pun here, but I just thought it was the absolute quinterrence of him. All that stuff. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I'd been to... One of the first things I did on the Terence film was I had to meet the family. And again, if Elsa and the boys had said no, I don't think we would have made the film, or we would have waited until the time was right. Because don't forget, there's I met with Elsa within a year of Terence dying.
Right.
I think it would have been like 11, maybe 12 months on from Terence's death. So that's very raw. Even for someone who lived a good long life, it's very raw still. Yeah. And they were they were vulnerable still at that point. And I met with them in a cafe near Terence's house, and we were all a bit nervous with each other, but they were very happy to help. And then I went back for a second meeting with them, and that was at the house. And then Elsa's a very generous, giving, kind lady, and she asked me if I'd like to see the office upstairs. And of course I said yes. And I just thought immediately, just like Frank having that connection in real life, I thought this is a gift. I'm sad that we've lost this person, obviously, but I was so glad that Elsa hadn't immediately cleaned out the room or emptied it. And I thought this has to be, if not the end, then certainly towards the end of the film. And originally I would have had Elsa taking Frank up into that room, because obviously the trick there is, I know that scene is coming, but I don't tell Frank anything about it. I say, so Frank knows, and this is what I do with Toby as well, that you construct these kind of bubbles around your presenter. So, of course, Frank knows he's going to Terence's house that day. He's probably thought about what he'd like to talk to the family about. He knows, that there's an office and we're going to pop our heads in, but that's it. And I haven't shown him any photos. I haven't told him anything about the contents. And what you see on screen is genuinely is a one take. Is not us mucking about and doing it 7 times or whatever. And it's a genuine reaction, and it was really important that we captured that and let Frank just explore that room. And actually, things like, this is a failing on my part, but it doesn't matter, that up on the notice board, that wonderful message that Terence had written to himself about how to be a writer, basically about kind of get up in the morning, write straight away, then do this. I hadn't spotted, because there's so much in that room to spot. I hadn't spotted it. And Frank walks in, reacts to the room, and then goes, "Oh, what's this?" And immediately finds the most perfect encapsulation of Terence in the entire room. And so it was a lovely thing to film, because actually Frank was only in that room for a few minutes. And then we went and did something else, and I went back and got lots of close-ups of things. So we were just very lucky with that. And I do think, I know the family are talking to various bits of the BBC, but I hope somebody does a proper archive of that room, because I think there are treasures there that I want to see in one of those Star Wars or Thunderbirds, like kind of cutaway diagrams, that kind of has lines that point to each thing to say that's what this is. That's what this is.
I'll tell you what we need is Gavin Rymel to do a 3D model of it.
Well, exactly.
And feature it in Doctor Who Monthly or something. Yeah.
For posterity, it needs to be recorded, and we can only scratch the surface of that really in this type of film. But it was lovely, and I think originally it was going to be not quite at the end of the film, and then when we watched it in the edit, we were like, "This is the ending." And it's nice to come back to the table of writers one final short time for a sign-off from Frank, but emotionally, you can't come back from that scene. Your structure is finished at that point, really.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm conscious of the fact that I can't keep you talking forever. So, and we should talk about the direct route definitely, because that's another great film, and another one of your poignant moments, because clearly for Timothy Combe, it's fantastic to go back to a place where he enjoyed making Doctor Who, and the one that he made there is for me anyway. It's one of the greats. I really love The Mind of Evil. I think it's a really top story, but also rather painful for him because he loved making it and then he was denied the chance to make more afterwards. And I love the way in the film that Graham Harper and Michael Bryant get behind him and sort of say, it's okay. You really did do a great thing there, and don't feel so badly about it. I don't know. It was a lovely dynamic between them.
Yeah, I really liked Tim. I love all three of the chaps, but I'd filmed with Tim before when we did the Military Mind, the Mind of Evil making of, and we'd taken him to Dover for that, but it was a more talking heady kind of film, quite an early one for us. And I'd always thought Tim is a very charismatic, kind of likeable chap, but there's a lot of pathos to his story. He genuinely, I think, wears his heart on his sleeve a bit, and he was really gutted that he didn't get to come back. And I do think it's a disservice, because those two that he does, Silurians and Mind of Evil, have really beautifully directed and have a kind of reality to them that the show could have done with from time to time, after that point. I'd have loved to have seen Barry keep him on longer, or even if he'd stayed on and done stuff with Hinchcliffe. I think he would have fitted in very well with Tom and Hinchcliffe, and to see what Dougie Camfield was achieving under Tom in Zygons and Seeds of Doom. Yes. Tim would have fitted right into that kind of ethos completely. So, with direct route, I guess I was conscious I didn't want to repeat too much what we'd done in Military Mind, but it felt natural to start the film at Dover Castle. I didn't want to be limited by the order of the stories in the season. I wanted to, we needed to think about the practicality of how on earth do we get from this point to this point. So starting at the radio telescope on the farm from Autons didn't make an awful lot of sense. It didn't feel as iconic, really. As Autons has lots of locations, and it was harder for us to go, where should we go for that? With Dover Castle, it felt like you wanted to access that, and Tim's story first of all. And I think it was very genuine. We were intending for Tim to stay with us throughout the 3 days. I mean, that genuinely was a 3-day shoot, and was crazy shoot. We started, and everybody travelled to Dover on the Thursday night, and then on the Friday we shot at Dover Castle, and then drove to Dungeness, shot at Dungeness, and then on the Saturday we drove from Dungeness. Oh, actually no, after Dungeness we drove half the journey to Cornwall, and then slept halfway in like a motorway hotel, and then the next morning drove the rest of the way, because that's an insane journey from Dungeness to Cornwall is insane.
Yeah. My dad did it once. I don't know what he was thinking about, but I mean, I live in Hampshire, and he went to Cornwall and then on to Kent, and he stopped with me overnight. And I said, "What were you thinking about? What were you thinking about?" I mean, Cornwall to Kent, but I guess you look on the map and it doesn't look too bad, but the roads are just appalling.
Ooh, it took a while, and then on the last day we were back at the radio telescope, and then Aldbourne. And I really wanted to finish the film at Aldbourne. Just felt like a pint outside of the Cloven Hoof is where you want to end up.
Yes.
But with Tim, he's the oldest of the three, and he'd contacted me beforehand to say, "Whew, sounds like that schedule is a bit a lot, isn't it? There's a lot." And so he'd put the warning very, very politely out there to say, "I don't know if I can do all this," and we'd obviously reassured as much as we could. I was thinking, I wanted to keep the filming itself fairly gentle, but there's a lot of travelling. There's a lot of sitting in the back of a black cab. And what happened was, at the end of the first day in Dungeness, I could just see that Tim was tired. And I thought, I know what's going to happen. I think Tim is going to come up to me after we wrap in Dungeness and say, I think you'll have to go on without me. I thought this is the moment today is heading towards. And so I thought, I took Tim to one side and said, "It's been a busy day, hasn't it? It's been a really busy day. You've been great, obviously, but do you think we should leave you here, essentially? Do you think, because it would be much better for me to know now so we can film your goodbye as part of the Dungeness scene.
Yes.
The awful thing, for purely from a ruthless filmmaking point of view, the awful thing would be if suddenly you finish Dungeness and then they're in the cab the next day and Tim's disappeared. And they're having to say, oh, it's such a shame that Tim didn't come on with us, and they're having to drop the exposition. And we weren't. I didn't want to use voiceover, so it's harder as well. Yeah. Unfortunately, I think absolutely for the best, Tim said, I've had a really good day. We did Dover Castle. Dungeness has been really interesting. Colony in space is in the quarry, so these lads can take it on. And I think the scene when he says goodbye to them at the fish shack is really touching, because that is genuinely what happened. And I don't think we'd pre-warned Graham and Michael particularly about it. I think it's genuinely just Tim coming straight from the conversation that the two of us had and signing off. And I think that moment when they kind of toast him with a bit of crab is really lovely. And having said that, I don't think it's a problem that he leaves, because it kind of, we've got so much good out of him in the first two segments of the film. And I do think he would have struggled. I think the quarry was more demanding than I was. I'd been on a recce, but it was more demanding on the day. It was a tougher day than I was thinking it might be. And I think it works that it just becomes Michael and Graham and their friendship, which is a genuine friendship from when they were young men.
Yes.
Really carries you through the rest of the film. So I think we kind of got the best of both worlds in a way with that. I'm very enjoyed it.
Yeah, and with the Terror of the Autons piece, you made the choice, I think, because you got some people who sort of turned up slightly unexpectedly, and then you gave that as an extra at the end rather than making it part of your film.
Yeah. I occasionally get told off for doing this. We did this on Looking for Lenny. There was a scene when Toby goes into the front room and meets Lenny's grandkids, and they're watching the Three Doctors. And we, again on that, included that as an extra, as a bonus scene rather than a deleted scene. And we did on Cookbook. I think we had a few recipes that we included as extras. In all three cases, I'm sure that Russell Minton, my executive, would have been quite happy to have those scenes in the film, and is always a bit like, why do you want to lose this? And for me, it's a feeling that you have when you watch a cut through, and you just know that the shape of it is wrong. You just know that the structure is bent out of shape by something, or maybe it brings the runtime over. Like in Looking for Lenny, it was a contrivance thing. It was that when you see the scene on its own, you think, well, that works fine on its own. If you were to actually watch it within the cut, then it would mean that Toby walks into Sadie Main's house, meets her in the kitchen. They look through beautiful photos for 10 minutes. And then on the way out, he realises that their family is in the front room the whole time, and they're watching the Three Doctors, and Toby sits with them, and you think, this is really corny. This is really... Because it was something that we'd set up, and I'd said, I don't want Toby to meet a whole family in one go. I want to come in gently with Sadie. And we included the bonus scene really on that, partly for me to say sorry to the family and to say I still want the kids to be involved in this, and I still want that to be a thing. With the one on the direct route, it was sort of the same thing. It was sort of the same problem. It was structurally, it felt like by the time Michael and Graham had finished their chat at the radio telescope, and they gave us a lovely kind of, right, where are we off to next? And they're off. Yeah. I thought, I want to go with them. I want to kind of go off to the next thing. I'm G'd up for Aldbourne. So it was a structural pacing thing, but it was also a believability thing. It also felt like, when they go to the quarry and they meet the two guys there, you know that you're not going to be let just onto a quarry on your own randomly. Yes. That would feel more contrived if they went in and we kept the experts, we kept the safety guys behind the camera. That would feel less believable. But on this one, with the ladies just dropping in, we heard you were down here, it just felt a bit... I just didn't believe it, and I don't think we filmed it amazingly well. And I thought, I want to go to Aldbourne now. It felt a bit like, if I'd structured it better, if I'd had them if I was cleverer, I would have maybe had them meet and receive Graham and Michael as they arrived at the telescope, and then peel off to let Michael and Graham explore the telescope and have a heart-to-heart, and then go. If I'd done it like that, it may well have kept in. But I didn't do it like that because I fell in love with the idea of you arrive and there's a big telescope and oh my God, we want to go and have a look, and you don't want people in the way of that. Just go and look at a telescope. So, sometimes you get yourself you trap yourself really from the way that you filmed it. But, I never know with these things, because we do get one or two people saying, "Oh, I wish they'd put it in," and it almost makes me not want to include it as a bonus scene, if you know what I mean. If we were being really mean, we would just leave it on the cutting room floor, like we do with lots and lots of stuff. But
Indeed.
I give it forward as a gift to say, this is good in itself, but it didn't have a place in our finished film, and I do not regret that.
You can have your cake and eat it.
That's the logic.
But don't come back to me complaining that the cake was in the wrong place or something.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has a right to slag off whatever they like about the films, but it's never going to change my mind about why we didn't include it. I just think I buy lots of movies on physical media, and I love watching deleted scenes. And when they released that deleted scene from Avengers Endgame when Tony Stark dies and then everybody takes the knee, I can absolutely see why they didn't include it. It makes perfect sense why they wouldn't include that. But you still had people on the YouTube comments saying, "Oh, I can't believe this isn't in the film." So you can't win that situation, really. You just have to say, it is what it is. We're never going to go back and George Lucas these things. This is frozen in carbonite. Here you go.
Yeah. No. Okay, and then Devil's Weekend, I suppose, somewhat similar to the piece that you did in Derry for the Green Death, in the sense that you're sort of bringing out the stories of some of the people who lived in the village then and now, and similarly, I guess, how that's come to mean something for them. I mean, I suppose there are probably more people who wander through Old Bourne day by day than probably in Derry, but yeah, it was good to see that it did mean something to those people.
Yeah, and you're right. It is very much a spiritual successor of the Keeping Up with the Joneses that we did for Derry, whereby we wanted to keep Katie, we wanted to keep our replica Bessie, and we sub out Stuart Bevan for John Levine.
Yeah.
I almost like the idea that Katie's kind of driven direct and she's kind of dropped off Stuart and then picked up John. But again, it's the same logic. It is saying, in both cases, we already had made a making of documentary for the DVD.
Yep.
In both cases, we actually hadn't gone on location. They were both studio ones. The Green Death one, I thought, is there anything to go back to? Most of it's gone, isn't it? So I didn't spend that money to go on location. And with the Demons, I think when we did the DVD, I thought I shouldn't go on location because that will repeat what happens in Return to Devil's End in the famous VHS documentary. We don't want to do that. Let's give it a different feel. And actually, when I came to look at the Blu-ray, I thought, well, I think you still want to go to Old Bourne. I think just because, and I talked to Toby about Return to Devil's End. Toby Haydock had never seen Return to Devil's End. And I thought, if Toby Haydock hasn't seen it, I think hardcore fans, and Toby's a hardcore fan, but a lot of fans assume that, of course, you've seen Shakedown or whatever, or you've seen the Zygon spin-off, so of course. But actually, loads of people haven't, and particularly the audience of the Blu-rays, I hope, has a lot of people coming fresh to these things who are maybe more new series fans exploring the old for the first time. So we had to go to Old Bourne, but also we couldn't just repeat the same making of stories that we had from the DVD. So you think, can we make it a cultural program? Can it be about the people involved and the villages involved, which had been touched on in Return to Devil's End? But I think we do take it that next step further, that we're just obsessed with Old Bourne and what Doctor Who meant to it and what it meant to Doctor Who, and so really, it was just trying to find the right people who were still alive, still there to tell us. And again, it's kids. Again, a lot of the contributors there are kind of people who were kids riding around in Bessie, who have grown up, and you kind of rely on the fact that this memory is chiseled into their brains, and that reliving it is moving, is emotional. But we had a lovely time. That one was a bit more silly and fun, I think, in a way that was just, particularly when you put John and Katie together. Larger than life is probably an understatement, and it was fun to chase around with them. And again, all shot in 2 days, so very, very busy shoot in COVID situations. So it was good. I'm glad that we got to do it, definitely.
Yeah, and I think also, similarly for someone of my age, when you get to see some of that historic footage, it takes you back to how it was then. The type of cars, it shouldn't do. I mean, the quality of the film shouldn't perhaps be evocative, but somehow it is. I guess just the whole thing of it, I suppose it's genuinely nostalgic. It's not fully nostalgic for me because I wasn't there, but it does bring back some essence of what it was like to be alive in those times.
But I think the lovely thing about the Demons is you can step into that still. Because,
yes, that's true.
Because you know all those kind of Richard Bignell Now and Then films show you how somewhere might have been knocked down and there's something big and concrete in its place. But Aldbourne, the reason it's still probably the most loved Doctor Who location that you can visit is that it looks the same. You know, they've done such a beautiful job of realising that their village was beautiful and then preserving that. But I can't think of many places. I mean, you know, the problem is if you go to like Little Hodcombe, actually you need to go to like several different villages.
Yes.
I guess the one from the Android Invasion. What's the one from the Android Invasion called? With the memorial and the pub. You could go there.
I've forgotten.
You could go there. But the Demons, the village is so central to the story. You know, and having the Barrows actually there an hour's walk down the country path it's a proper day out in Aldbourne. And I think we wanted to kind of embrace the fact that is. There's a cosy charm. There's this backlash against the Demons that's been going on for about 20 years or so, maybe 30 years, and I still love it. I kind of don't quite trust anybody who comes out and says the Demons is shit, because I kind of think you're just showing off now. You're reacting to Doctor Who fan opinion of the 70s and 80s, and I still think it's a really well made piece of Doctor Who, and any time Doctor Who goes on location it becomes more interesting for me, and it's got shitloads of location in it, so we just wanted to kind of reflect that back at it really, and have a bit of a hymn to the village. And you know, it was always fun with Katie, always fun with John, so we had a good time.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, did you know that what she was going to do on the hill when she sort of, you know, starts reminiscing? Was that?
No, I actually didn't. On something like Devil's Weekend, again, I'll have a very rough script. I'll have a sense of, you know, because a film like that, I don't want to mess about with the chronology. I don't want to move something from day one into day two or whatever. So what you see on screen is the order that we filmed things in. I don't think there's any point when we change the order. So it's all happening, and so there's a script that says, you know, we need to drive Bessie down a road, and now the camera's in with Katie, and she can say something, don't know what, but something about being back. And when we went up on the Barrows, Katie had said to me, "Oh, remind me when we go to the Barrows, there's a story I want to tell. Okay. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but just give me a nudge." And actually, I don't think I had to nudge her. I think that she just, in a wonderful way, started telling that story. So John didn't know what was coming. I didn't know what was coming. And the nice thing about it is that you just roll with it. And obviously we shot that we shot that twice, you know, so that the actual meat of that is all in a single take with me holding a camera right up with them. But then you think it's such a beautiful location that you want to just get out of the way and do a drone version, you know, because obviously you'd watch it and think, well, where's the cameraman in the drone shots? Cameraman's disappeared because I've scarpered off and I'm hiding in a bush somewhere. And I think it's a really lovely moment because Katie feels so, you know, she was so genuine. Also to have somebody bring a bit of reality into that story of the Demons, which has always been, it was so much fun. And Katie's always been more reserved about it and not quite as gushing. So that story makes a bit more sense of how she feels about it. And I think it's the perfect place to do that. Visually, it feels like a very dreamlike setting. We just happened to be there at Magic Hour, you know, at the end of the day. And it was the last thing we filmed on the first day, and you thought, this is lovely. And again, we were thinking about, I brought some big like X-Files type torches so that they could have a walk and talk on the way back from the Barrow. And after we'd filmed that scene, we were like, well, no, that's the end of that has to be the end of day one, doesn't it? You don't want to then have a little chat about whatever. You've given us an emotional peak, and now everybody needs to go to sleep until the next morning, and it's a fade to black. So no, I was really happy that Katie, you know, it's nice that she trusted us and that she was invested enough in the film, you know, to think I want to give something that hasn't been heard before. That's always what we want, really.
Sure. Okay, so I think, I mean, if we briefly look forward then perhaps to the season 24 box set and the film that you've got coming on that, you give us some idea of what we can expect.
Yeah, I think 24 will be really fun. I think it will feel a bit like Trial of a Time Lord, where it's a season that has its fans, and also has its detractors, and maybe is slightly more Marmite than some of our boxes. But I hope that the 24 set will win over a lot of people, because there is a shitload on it. And there is just... The lovely thing is, when you get to these later seasons of the original run, we start accessing things from the John Nathan Turner archive and other bits and bobs, where recording sessions in the studio have just been kept. So suddenly you have hours, you have tens and tens of hours of these studio sessions, which I think some people quite like having on in the background as they do other things, or they go to sleep with them on. But they're just interesting in a way that on the DVDs we probably edited them and cut them down, or just use clips in the documentaries.
Yes.
And with the Blu-rays you can expand and use that space. So I think there's a lot of that kind of stuff on it. I was slightly less involved because I was on another job for the BBC at the same time. But I came out of that to do a follow-up in the Doctor's Table series that we do, which I'm very fond of, where we did one on trial with Colin and Nicola and Bonnie and Michael Jaston. And this time we went back to the same restaurant for about the 1 week it was open in the middle of the lockdown last December.
Yeah.
I went to the Ivy Richmond, and so we got Sophie Aldred and Sylvester McCoy, Bonnie Langford and Clive Merrison from Paradise Towers. And they're just having... basically, I mean, there's so much fun to film because we just take 5 cameras into the room. So everybody's got a close-up and then there's a wide shot. And we get the champagne going, you get a 3-course meal, and I put in these kind of slightly silly questions from a TARDIS cookie jar for people to pick out. So we're kind of riffing a little bit on Doctor Who Magazine's TARDIS thing. But, I think you do get some really unexpected, weird stuff from the people. So we learn... whether Sylvester would resort to cannibalism, if he was involved in a plane crash. We take them to kind of different places. So I think that'll be great fun. I know that I've not seen these yet, but I know that Richard Latto has looked after a feature-length retrospective on the season. I think it's called Here's to the Future, and Steve Broster has done a making of for Delta, which was always missing one from the original DVDs. So I think they've now talked about the date being June 21st, I think, haven't they? I've not.
Yes. Well, I've seen that. Somebody told me. I haven't seen it sort of published, but yeah, I agree that I think that's right.
I never know anything about dates, so I've got no idea if that's right or not, because I deliver the stuff and then I run off in the opposite direction and let other people worry about that. I'm sure it'll be out at some point, and I think it'll be lots of fun, is my hope. And then we're getting busy on what comes beyond, but we shall see.
Well, I think whatever you've got to offer us, I'm sure we'll all be keen to see it. I mean, you were saying earlier how even hardcore fans some have their own areas. Some people were into the novels, I suppose. Some people into the Big Finish stuff. Some people into those spin-off videos you were mentioning. But I think everyone should be into these Blu-rays, because it's it's the show that we love, but so much more. So thanks very much for your involvement in that.
Thank you.
And thanks also, Chris, for all the time you spent this morning talking to us. It's been fantastic.
That's okay. It's been my pleasure, Richard. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all.
The end. I'll turn off my... Let me just turn off that.